Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new modded Cities Skylines 1 series. We're going to trade in the sandy beaches of the Caribbean for the rugged shores and occasional sandy beaches of Lake Superior. The build's going to focus on a midwestern style city with an industrial past that's currently seeing a resurgence of modern development. If you're familiar with the area, you might already be able to guess where I'm talking about, and it's a relatively small city on the very western tip of Lake Superior called Duluth. And the reason I chose Duluth is that, well, first of all, I've been there a few times, so I kind of have a feeling for what the details from the ground are like. And I also think it has a lot of interesting historical infrastructure, a lot of interesting history. Fairly convoluted geography with some flat areas and some hills along the shoreline as well. That's going to be a lot of fun to build on. And it at least has the reputation of taking advantage of some of its old industrial infrastructure and repurposing it to turn itself into a tourist city. So we're going to take inspiration from a lot of those different things over the course of the series, but we're going to start with what is probably, at least for me, the most iconic part of the city, which is the aerial lift bridge. This bridge crosses the canal that allows access to the harbor from Lake Superior. It was originally built in 1905 as a ferry bridge, which is kind of unusual, but it was converted just a couple decades later into a vertical lift bridge. There is a movable bridge mod on the workshop, but I've heard it's totally broken, so I'm not going to risk using that, and instead I'm going to custom make one. So my plan to do this is to run an invisible road across the canal, bridging the gap between these two sections of road, having them run up a little bit so we just have enough room for pedestrians to walk underneath, because we're going to have a large walkway running all the way around the edge of the canal. And then what I'm going to do is set up timed traffic lights on either side. And I'm just going to mess around a little bit and kind of see what it's like to have just a simple on-off sequence. So when the bridge is moving up and down, it's going to be off. And when the bridge portion is down and ships can't pass through, it's going to be green so all the cars and pedestrians can pass across. Of course, I also set up a bus line just so we can have vehicles going back and forth to make sure that everything's working properly. I also set it up so that the inside of the traffic light, so if you were leaving the bridge going either direction, is always on, because obviously I don't want people to actually be stuck waiting at a traffic light on the bridge. That just isn't going to be practical. So to build the physical portion of the bridge, I'm using this building from a lift bridge set. It's just a static lift bridge set that comes with like a network of truss bridges leading up to it. I'm just going to use the building portion for the tower, which I think looks fantastic. I mean, this asset is just one of the best assets I've ever seen on the workshop. It's so detailed, looks so good, and it perfectly fits the style of build we're going for, of course. I'm going to center that over the road, expand it out a little bit so there's enough for both pedestrians and cars to pass underneath, and then fill in some of these ugly gaps from the raised road with some concrete wall networks and just a big block of concrete smushed down with PO to cover up the ugly seams at the front. I'm going to take all this, copy it over to the other side, and do a little bit of detailing to clean it up. Unfortunately, this pack didn't come with a building version, I don't think, of the actual bridge span, so I have to take a separate asset and fit it to size with this one, change the color just a little bit to get it to match the bridge, and then run that across the top. And I think that actually matches really well, so I'm not too worried about using separate assets for this in this particular case. I'm going to take another copy of this and lower it down twice by accident, and then we're going to make the actual bridge section that is hopefully going to move up and down. I couldn't find a metal bridge base asset. If you've ever driven across a metal bridge like this, it has these kind of nasty looking metal grates that run parallel to the length of the bridge, and they make this horrible sound when you drive over them. So I couldn't find anything quite like that, so I'm just using this kind of generic metal grid pattern. And then I'm going to supplement it. I thought it looked a little bit too wimpy just by itself, so I'm going to supplement it with this bridge asset. I don't think they would use brick in a movable bridge, so I'm going to take a color rectangle and try to cover that up in PO. Then I just need to stretch around some of these nodes a little bit to make it look like the tower portion of the bridge actually has something to latch onto to pull up and down. Then I'm going to group every single asset that's part of the movable portion of the bridge together in PO and add a back and forth module. And just like I did with the traffic light, I'm going to add some kind of random numbers, set the placements just to get a sense of how this works, because I've never really done this before. And then you can set it so that the bridge portion moving up and down is the kind of center of the group, and all these little pieces that are attached to it in the group will follow along when you select this option in the module. Now, these both work pretty well independently, but the difficult part, and potentially the foil to this whole plan, is getting them to line up. So I timed both sections, the traffic light and the bridge portion, and did some math that I probably overcomplicated quite a bit. Just pause if you're interested. And then I put the resulting numbers that I got into the relevant sections in procedural objects. I made sure they were all lined up. Basically, each part was at the beginning of its own cycle, and then I unpaused the game. And it actually sort of worked. There are only two problems with this. One is that it seems to get out of sync pretty easily, and I think that's because Traffic Manager is tied to the simulation speed. So if you speed the game up to 3 times instead of 1 or whatever, it will adjust, whereas I don't think that PO is, so I can't really change the game speed without breaking it. And of course, it also doesn't actually respond to ships entering the harbor, which kind of sucks. But we did get something that at least has the potential to work, so we can set up some cool scenes of ships going underneath the bridge. So I'm going to call it a partial success. Let me know what you think. The canal in Duluth has a couple of long piers that stick out into Lake Superior, and each has a unique lighthouse on the tip. So I'm going to try to replicate that, or build something inspired by it, at least. Instead of just building a non-functional piece of concrete that sticks out into the water with a couple lighthouses on the end, I wanted to at least attempt to make it usable by people, so people could walk out onto these piers and watch ships go by or visit the lighthouses or whatever. So I'm using the same key asset that I used for the canal proper and connecting that up, except I don't want this giant thick walkway sticking out into the lake, so I'm going to use node controller renewal and squeeze it down to about halfway, and also flip it around and have a second copy over on the other side so that there's a fence on either side, because obviously it's pointless to just have a fence on one side if you're going to have people walking down it all the time. Of course, the problem with that is that it results in this ugly land sticking out on either side, so I'm just going to take some terraforming roads, lower those down to the lake bed level, and put those right up against the key so we get these nice, clean lines. The real lighthouses have these pointed concrete bows on the front that stick out, which look kind of cool, so I'm just going to take these breakwater assets, squeeze them down with PO so they fit, and make a somewhat, honestly, lumpy looking point out in front of the lighthouses. It's not the most beautiful thing I've ever made, but I think it gets the point across. These piers and the walkway underneath the bridge are eventually going to be part of what will be the larger Lake Walk Park, which is taken from, you might be surprised, the park of the exact same name in Duluth, which runs along the lake, and you can walk along it. So I'm going to take these same piers, run that along this portion of the lake, and get some of these nice river rocks and try to put them more or less randomly along the edge of the walkway. Obviously, that's going to get all fleshed out as we move on to the other portions of that peninsula, but we're not going to be doing that this episode. We're going to be hopping across the canal to this area where we're going to be making a small neighborhood. I just wanted to get a little bit of population going for the city, and this area in real life is, for the most part, low-density residential. So I'm just going to take my group of houses and plop these down. This is really just kind of an exploratory thing. This isn't going to end up being the most realistic neighborhood ever built, but I wanted to see what all these assets look like, how they're going to fit together, what kind of details they have built in, and that sort of stuff. And I also wanted to get used to some of the new assets and mods that I'm using, like Node Controller Renewal. I used to use the old version The renewal version is so much better. And I also wanted to get used to the new set of roads that I'm using, in particular the big urban roads, which I hadn't had the full set of in Todos Santos. By the way, if you're interested in those or any of the other assets or mods that I'm using, I have those linked down in the description, as usual. To finish off this area, I wanted to build a little neighborhood park. So this park is situated in this unusually shaped block, which is always kind of hard to develop with houses, so I think it's a lot easier just to put a park here. Decided to integrate our little test bus system into the city's growing public transit network with a bus stop here. And then add a little pathway over to the park, and same thing from the other side. I'm going to fence off the park from the main road. Add a couple of people generators to make it at least somewhat functional, and then explore some of these tree assets that I downloaded. I tried to put together a collection of trees that you would find in the area. I did probably a little bit too much research into that, considering how little information I was able to absorb, but hopefully the trees I picked are somewhat representative of what you'd see there. I'm really not too worried about individual trees matching the types of species you'd find there, but more so like the overall look and the arrangement that they're used in, at least for landscaping trees. You may have noticed that a lot of these houses I put down are screaming about crime. Fair enough. So I'm going to add a small police station in here and fumble around for quite a while with the big parking lot roads, which are a lot more flexible than the original parking lot roads, and therefore a lot harder to figure out. I'm going to get a lot better at that next episode. But I did manage to get a parking lot that looks okay, and I did just a little bit of detailing to spruce up the police station. Just a couple more things to finish out the very first episode of this series. I wanted to add a small park on either side of the bridge. We're just going to take care of one of these sides this episode, and we're going to do the other side and fit it into all the stuff we're going to build next episode. But that park basically just consists of a couple of walkways to access the lake walk from the main roads. We're also going to try to light this thing up so that it looks cool at night, but I couldn't really find any lights that were bright enough and at the right angle on the workshop, so we just get this kind of sad little lighting on either side. So let me know if you know of any cool spotlight assets on the workshop that are really strong and at something like a 45-degree angle, maybe a little steeper. Finally, I wanted to just give you a sense of where the downtown is going to go. It's going to be more or less in the same place as downtown Duluth, along this hillside right on the shore on the other side of this freeway. You can kind of get a sense of the slope that the downtown's going to be on here. As you might have noticed, I'm going to try to keep these videos a little bit shorter than my episodes of Todos Santos were. Next episode, I'm also going to make some big adjustments to the visuals of the time-lapse, so if you don't like how it looks, at least hold out until next episode to see the final visual settings. Thank you so much for watching the very first episode of Amaranth Bay. I hope to see you next time.